In 1960, the Soviet space program stood as humanity's greatest triumph over the cosmos. Yet within the classified archives of Baikonur Cosmodrome, buried beneath layers of state secrecy and bureaucratic silence, lay evidence of something far more disturbing than any failed mission officially recorded. The case of Cosmonaut Zero represents not just a loss of human life, but a deliberate erasure so complete that even today, nearly 70 years later, the full truth remains locked away in vaults that may never be opened. The story begins not with rockets or launch pads, but with a simple administrative error discovered in 1968 by an archive clerk named Dmitry Volkov. While cataloguing personnel files for the space program's 8th anniversary, Volkov noticed an inconsistency in the numbering system used for cosmonaut identification cards. Between the files of Yuri Gagarin and German Titov lay a gap where another file should have existed. The missing number belonged to what internal documents referred to only as zero. Volkov's initial assumption was clerical error, perhaps a misfiled document, or a training candidate who had been disqualified before receiving full certification. But as he delved deeper into the administrative records, a pattern emerged that would haunt him for the remainder of his career. Medical examinations, psychological evaluations, training schedules, dietary requirements, all existed for Cosmonaut Zero. Someone real had occupied that space in the program, someone whose existence had been methodically scrubbed from official history. The Soviet Union's space program operated under such intense secrecy that even success stories remained classified for years. Failures, when they occurred, simply vanished. But the case of Cosmonaut Zero was different. This was not a failed mission that had been covered up. It was a successful mission that had been denied. According to the fragmentary records Volkov uncovered, Zero had not only completed training, but had actually been launched into space on March 15, 1960, weeks before Gagarin's historic flight. The launch facility records from Baikonur told a story that contradicted everything the world believed about the space race. On that March morning, a Vostok spacecraft designated Test Vehicle 7 had lifted off from Pad 1 at exactly 4:37 in the morning local time. The mission parameters matched those that would later be used for Gagarin's flight, a single orbit around Earth lasting approximately 108 minutes. But unlike Gagarin's triumphant return, Test Vehicle 7 had completed its mission in complete silence. Dr. Sergei Korolev, the chief designer of the Soviet space program, had maintained meticulous personal notes throughout the early years of human spaceflight. These notes, discovered in 1965 after his death, contained references to what he called the preliminary verification flight. Korolev wrote of a volunteer whose identity had to be protected for reasons of state security that supersede even our greatest achievements. The volunteer, according to Korolev's notes, had requested that their name never be publicly revealed, regardless of the mission's outcome. The medical team assigned to monitor Test Vehicle 7 was led by Dr. Elena Karpova, a cardiovascular specialist who had been recruited specifically for the space program. Her sealed medical reports, filed separately from the main mission documentation, described a subject who maintained normal vital signs throughout launch and orbital insertion. The telemetry data showed no signs of distress or equipment malfunction. For 97 minutes of the 108-minute flight, everything proceeded according to plan. At mission elapsed time, 97 minutes and 43 seconds, all communication with Test Vehicle 7 ceased. Not the gradual degradation typical of equipment failure, but an instantaneous and complete silence. Ground control waited through the expected re-entry window, tracking stations across the Soviet Union, scanning for any signal from the returning spacecraft. The capsule's automatic distress beacon, designed to activate upon atmospheric re-entry, never transmitted. Search teams were dispatched to the calculated landing zone in Kazakhstan, a vast stretch of steppe land where recovery operations could be conducted away from civilian observation. For 6 days, helicopters and ground crews combed an area spanning over 200 square kilometers. They found no trace of Test Vehicle 7, no parachute, no heat-scorched capsule, no human remains. It was as if the spacecraft had simply dissolved in the vacuum of space. The official explanation, recorded in internal documents but never released to the public, attributed the loss to a catastrophic failure during re-entry. The intense heat generated during atmospheric entry had allegedly destroyed the spacecraft so completely that no recoverable debris remained. This explanation satisfied the bureaucratic requirement for closure while avoiding uncomfortable questions about the mission's true purpose. But Dr. Karpova's private journals, discovered years later in her apartment after her death in 1966, told a different story. She had continued to monitor radio frequencies associated with the space program for months after the disappearance of Test Vehicle 7. On 3 separate occasions, she recorded brief transmissions on the emergency frequency designated for cosmonaut communications. The transmissions, each lasting less than 30 seconds, consisted of a repeated call sign that matched the identifier assigned to Cosmonaut 0. The recordings, made on Dr. Karpova's personal equipment, were technically illegal under Soviet law. Unauthorized monitoring of state communications carried severe penalties, including lengthy prison sentences, yet something about the transmissions compelled her to continue listening, to preserve evidence of what she believed was a stranded cosmonaut attempting to make contact with Earth. The first transmission occurred 11 days after the disappearance, at 2:17 in the morning Moscow time. Dr. Karpova's notes describe a voice, heavily distorted by static and distance, repeating the call sign 0 Alpha 7, followed by coordinates that placed the transmission source somewhere in high Earth orbit. The voice was calm, methodical, as if following standard communication protocols, despite being stranded in space. 17 days later, a second transmission was detected on the same frequency. This time, the coordinates indicated a position farther from Earth, beyond the range of any spacecraft technology available in 1960. The voice remained calm, but Dr. Karpova noted subtle changes in speech patterns that suggested prolonged isolation was beginning to affect the speaker's psychological state. The final transmission came 43 days after the initial disappearance. The signal was so weak that Dr. Karpova had to amplify it to the maximum setting of her radio equipment. The coordinates placed the source at an impossible distance from Earth, far beyond the gravitational influence of our planet. The voice spoke for 27 seconds, but the words were no longer in Russian. Dr. Karpova transcribed what sounded like a countdown in an unknown language, followed by silence that would prove to be permanent. In 1961, following Gagarin's successful flight, the Soviet Union faced international pressure to release details about their space program's safety record. Questions arose about test flights, failed missions, and the possibility of unreported cosmonaut fatalities. The government's response was to create a historical narrative that positioned Gagarin's flight as the first human spaceflight attempt, eliminating any suggestion of prior missions. The process of rewriting history required more than simply classifying documents. Physical evidence had to be destroyed, personnel had to be relocated or reassigned, and memories had to be systematically erased. Dr. Karpova was transferred to a remote medical facility in Siberia, where she remained until her death. Dmitry Volkov found himself reassigned to a clerical position in the Ministry of Agriculture, his security clearance permanently revoked. Even the physical spaces associated with Cosmonaut 0 were altered. Launchpad 1 at Baikonur was completely rebuilt in 1962, officially to accommodate larger spacecraft, but effectively erasing any evidence of the March 15th launch. The mission control room used to monitor Test Vehicle 7 was converted into a storage facility, its communication equipment removed and destroyed. The families of personnel who had worked on the Zero mission were relocated across the Soviet Union, their previous assignments classified under state security regulations. Children were enrolled in new schools under different names, their educational records altered to reflect fictional histories. The systematic erasure extended even to marriages and birth certificates, creating a paper trail that supported the official narrative while burying the truth. By 1965, Cosmonaut Zero had been successfully deleted from Soviet history. No photographs existed showing the individual, no training records bore their name, no family members retained memories that contradicted the official story. The person who had volunteered for humanity's first orbital flight had become, in every meaningful sense, a ghost. Yet traces remained, hidden in places the sensors had not thought to look. Library circulation records showed that someone had repeatedly borrowed technical manuals on spacecraft life support systems in the months leading up to the March 15th launch. Cafeteria meal logs indicated that an extra tray had been prepared daily for the cosmonaut training facility during the same period. Even laundry records showed the cleaning and preparation of a spacesuit that was never officially manufactured. These mundane details, meaningless in isolation, formed a pattern that confirmed what Dr. Karpova and Dmitry Volkov had suspected. Someone had indeed preceded Gagarin into space, someone whose sacrifice had been deemed too politically dangerous to acknowledge. The implications were staggering. If the first human spaceflight had ended in failure or disappearance, the entire narrative of Soviet technological superiority would have been undermined. In 1967, an unexpected discovery threatened to expose the Cosmonaut Zero cover-up. American intelligence satellites detected an unusual object in high Earth orbit, tumbling slowly end over end in a trajectory that suggested it had been there for several years. The object's size and shape were consistent with a Vostok spacecraft, but its position was impossible to reconcile with any known Soviet mission. The object was designated Unknown Satellite 4 by American tracking stations and became the subject of intense intelligence analysis. Attempts to communicate with the object on standard Soviet frequencies yielded no response, but sensitive radio telescopes detected faint electronic emissions that matched the signature of Vostok spacecraft systems running on emergency power. Soviet officials, when confronted with American questions about the mysterious object, denied any knowledge of its origin. They suggested it might be debris from an early unmanned test flight, a position that satisfied diplomatic requirements while avoiding confirmation of human involvement. The object continued its slow orbit, gradually decaying toward an eventual re-entry that would destroy any evidence of its true nature. The discovery of Unknown Satellite 4 prompted a review of all early Soviet space missions by Western intelligence agencies. Gaps in the timeline were identified, inconsistencies in official reports were analyzed, and patterns of secrecy that exceeded even normal Soviet standards were documented. Yet without access to internal Soviet documents, the full truth remained elusive. Meanwhile, within the Soviet Union, the remaining evidence of Cosmonaut Zero faced systematic destruction. In 1968, the archive building where Dmitry Volkov had made his discovery suffered a convenient fire that destroyed an entire floor of historical documents. The fire was attributed to faulty electrical wiring, but witnesses reported that the flames seemed to burn hottest in the sections containing early space program records. Dr. Karpova's radio recordings, stored in her apartment since her death in 1966, disappeared during what was officially described as a routine inspection by housing authorities. Her neighbors reported seeing men in dark coats removing several boxes of electronic equipment, but no official record of this confiscation was ever filed. The few surviving members of the original mission control team found themselves subject to increased surveillance and periodic questioning about their memories of early space flights. Some were relocated to remote facilities where their knowledge could be contained and monitored. Others simply vanished, their whereabouts becoming another mystery within the larger cover-up. As the 1960s drew to a close, Cosmonaut Zero had been successfully erased from history. The individual who had volunteered to risk everything for the advancement of human knowledge had been denied even the acknowledgement of their sacrifice. Yet the absence itself became a kind of monument, a gap in the historical record that raised questions for anyone persistent enough to look. The truth about Cosmonaut Zero represents more than just another Cold War secret. It speaks to the price of progress, the weight of politics over human achievement, and the ease with which inconvenient truths can be buried beneath layers of official denial. Somewhere in the vast darkness between Earth and space, the answer to this mystery continues its eternal orbit, carrying with it the unacknowledged courage of the first human being to leave our planet behind. Unknown Satellite 4 eventually completed its decay orbit in 1969, burning up during re-entry over the Pacific Ocean. No debris was ever recovered, and with its destruction went the last physical evidence of what may have been humanity's first true step into the cosmos. The object's final moments were tracked by multiple ground stations, but the data was classified and remains locked away in archives that have never been opened to public scrutiny. Today, researchers occasionally stumble across references to early Soviet space missions that do not align with official histories. A mention in a technical report, a photograph with an unexplained figure in the background, a budget allocation that exceeds the cost of acknowledged programs. These fragments hint at the existence of missions that were never supposed to be remembered, experiments that pushed the boundaries of human endurance in service of national pride. The space program continued its public march toward greater achievements, landing on the moon and establishing permanent orbital stations. Each success built upon the lessons learned from earlier missions, including those that had been deliberately forgotten. The courage of known cosmonauts was celebrated around the world, while the sacrifice of Cosmonaut Zero remained buried beneath decades of silence. In the years that followed, occasional reports surfaced of radio signals detected on frequencies once used by the Soviet space program. These signals, typically lasting only seconds and occurring at irregular intervals, defied explanation by conventional astronomy. Some researchers suggested they might be echoes of old transmissions reflected back to Earth after years of traveling through space. Others proposed more disturbing explanations, theories that equipment failure or navigational error might have sent Test Vehicle 7 on a trajectory that carried it far from Earth's protective gravity. The possibility that Cosmonaut Zero might still be alive, trapped in an endless orbit around the sun or drifting toward distant stars, haunted the few individuals who knew the truth about the March 15th mission. This scenario, while scientifically implausible given the limitations of 1960 technology, could not be entirely dismissed. The vast emptiness of space contained room for mysteries that challenged human understanding, phenomena that existed beyond the reach of earthbound investigation. Those who had worked on the early space program carried the weight of these secrets until their deaths. On deathbeds, some whispered fragments of the truth to family members who did not understand the significance of what they were hearing. References to a missing cosmonaut, to a mission that had succeeded too well, to a person who had volunteered for immortality without realizing the cost. These deathbed confessions were dismissed as the ravings of dying minds. Another layer of protection around a truth too dangerous to acknowledge. The archives containing the complete truth about Cosmonaut Zero remain sealed, their contents protected by classifications that will not expire for decades. Even if the documents were eventually released, the passage of time has eliminated most witnesses and destroyed much of the physical evidence. The story exists now primarily as a void in the historical record, defined more by what is missing than by what can be proven. Yet the implications of Cosmonaut Zero's mission continue to resonate through the space program. Every safety protocol, every backup system, every redundant communication array carries within it lessons learned from a failure that was never officially acknowledged. The ghost of the first human orbital flight influenced every subsequent mission, an invisible presence that ensured no other cosmonaut would share the same fate. The international space community has developed an informal understanding about certain gaps in early mission records. Questions are not asked about specific time periods, particular personnel assignments, or certain technical achievements that seem to precede their supposed development. This professional courtesy maintains the fiction that human spaceflight began with Yuri Gagarin, while acknowledging that the true history is both more complex and more troubling than official records suggest. As space exploration has expanded beyond Earth orbit, occasional anomalies are detected that echo the mystery of Cosmonaut Zero. Objects of unknown origin appearing on long-range sensors, radio signals from empty regions of space, trajectories that suggest human technology in places where no human presence should exist. These discoveries are quietly investigated and just as quietly forgotten, adding to a growing collection of cosmic mysteries that challenge our understanding of what lies beyond our planet. The legacy of Cosmonaut Zero extends beyond the immediate tragedy of a lost life and a covered-up mission. It represents the first instance of human beings becoming truly lost in space, not just physically, but historically. The complete erasure of an individual's existence serves as a reminder of how easily truth can be sacrificed to political necessity. How thoroughly a person can be removed from the historical record when their story becomes inconvenient to those in power. Modern space agencies have implemented policies designed to prevent another Cosmonaut Zero scenario. Detailed record-keeping requirements, international oversight agreements, and transparency protocols ensure that space missions cannot be conducted in complete secrecy. Yet these safeguards exist only because someone, somewhere, learned a lesson from a mission that was never supposed to have happened. The technology that enabled Cosmonaut Zero's flight in 1960 was primitive by current standards, but it was sufficient to carry a human being beyond the protection of Earth's atmosphere and into the infinite darkness between worlds. The spacecraft systems that malfunctioned or failed during the mission would be considered laughably unreliable today, but they represented the pinnacle of human engineering achievement at the time. The margins for error were tiny, the safety redundancies minimal, and the consequences of failure absolute. In this context, Cosmonaut Zero's decision to volunteer for the mission takes on an almost mythical quality. Knowing the risks, understanding the primitive nature of the technology, and accepting the possibility of never returning to Earth, this individual chose to step beyond the boundary of human experience. Their motivation remains unknown, their identity erased, but their courage stands as a testament to the human drive to explore, regardless of personal cost. The radio transmissions that Dr. Karpova recorded in the weeks following the mission's disappearance suggest that Cosmonaut Zero survived the initial flight and remained conscious during at least the early phases of whatever trajectory carried Test Vehicle 7 away from Earth. The calm, methodical nature of the transmissions indicates someone following training protocols, maintaining professional composure, even while facing the ultimate isolation. The progression of the transmissions from near Earth to increasingly distant positions suggests that Test Vehicle 7 was somehow accelerated beyond escape velocity, possibly by a gravitational slingshot effect or a malfunction in the spacecraft's propulsion system. The final transmission, with its countdown in an unknown language, remains the most disturbing aspect of the entire case. What could drive someone to abandon their native tongue in favor of something else entirely? What discoveries might await someone drifting alone through the cosmic void? These questions will likely never be answered definitively. The evidence has been too thoroughly destroyed, the witnesses silenced too completely, and the truth buried too deeply beneath layers of state secrecy. Cosmonaut Zero has achieved a peculiar kind of immortality, existing as a legend within a secret, a story that cannot be told but refuses to be entirely forgotten. The space program that emerged from these early experiments has achieved wonders that would have seemed impossible in 1960. Human beings now live permanently in orbit, have walked on the moon, and plan missions to Mars and beyond. Each of these achievements builds upon lessons learned from earlier missions, including those that were never officially acknowledged. Somewhere in the design specifications of every spacecraft, in the protocols of every mission, lies the invisible influence of humanity's first true space traveler. As we look toward a future where human exploration of space will expand beyond our solar system, the story of Cosmonaut Zero serves as both warning and inspiration. It reminds us that the greatest adventures often come with the greatest risks, that progress sometimes demands sacrifices that cannot be publicly acknowledged, and that the heroes of exploration are not always those whose names appear in history books. The vast darkness that surrounds our small planet contains mysteries that we have barely begun to understand. Within that darkness, carrying the hopes and fears of an entire species, travels the answer to one of the Cold War's most closely guarded secrets. Whether as debris, as dust, or as something else entirely, Cosmonaut Zero continues the mission that began on that March morning in 1960, a solitary representative of human curiosity and courage, drifting forever through the infinite night between stars. The silence that has surrounded this story for more than 6 decades is now permanent. The last witnesses have died, the last documents have been destroyed, and the last opportunities for official acknowledgement have passed. What remains is a gap in the historical record, a void shaped like a human being who dared to reach beyond the boundaries of human experience and paid the ultimate price for that courage. In the end, perhaps the greatest tragedy of Cosmonaut Zero is not the loss of life, or even the cover-up of the mission, but the loss of memory itself. Someone who embodied the highest aspirations of human exploration has been reduced to fragmentary evidence and whispered rumors. Their name is unknown, their face unseen, their words unheard. Yet their spirit lives on in every mission that follows, every boundary that is crossed, every step humanity takes toward the stars, and somewhere in the darkness between worlds, the echo of a human heartbeat continues its journey through space and time, carrying with it the unacknowledged dreams of a species that refuses to be bound by the limits of its birth planet. The mission of Cosmonaut Zero has no scheduled end, no planned return, no earthly conclusion. It continues still, a testament to the price we pay for the privilege of calling ourselves explorers of the infinite. The archives that might have contained definitive proof of Cosmonaut Zero's existence were permanently sealed in 1969, following a directive signed personally by Leonid Brezhnev. The order classified all materials related to preliminary space verification flights under the highest level of state secrecy, with a classification period extending beyond the lifetimes of anyone who had worked on the original mission. In 1968, the last physical reminder of Cosmonaut Zero was quietly removed from Baikonur Cosmodrome. A small memorial plaque, installed by ground crew who had witnessed the March 15th launch, had been hidden behind a maintenance panel in the original Mission Control Building. The plaque bore no name, only the inscription, "For the one who went first," in Russian. When the building was demolished to make way for more modern facilities, the plaque disappeared into a pile of rubble that was used to fill construction sites across the facility. The Soviet space program's official history was finalized in 1970 with the publication of Conquest of Space, a comprehensive account that positioned Gagarin's flight as the beginning of human space exploration. The book made no mention of any prior attempts, failed missions, or experimental flights involving human subjects. It became the definitive reference for all subsequent historical accounts, ensuring that Cosmonaut Zero would remain buried beneath layers of carefully constructed narrative. Dr. Karpova's radio equipment, confiscated after her death, was eventually traced to a basement storage facility in Moscow, where it had been forgotten for decades. When the facility was cleared in the late 1980s, maintenance workers discovered boxes of electronic equipment labeled only with inventory numbers. The radio receiver that had captured Cosmonaut Zero's final transmissions was sold as surplus to an electronics hobbyist who never learned of its historical significance. The tracking data that had placed unknown Satellite 4 in its impossible orbit was declassified by American intelligence in 1994, long after the object had burned up during re-entry. The files revealed that the satellite's trajectory had indeed been consistent with a Vostok spacecraft launched in March 1960. But by then, the Cold War had ended, and the revelation attracted little attention. The few researchers who noticed the discrepancy were told that it represented debris from an early unmanned test flight. Today, the launch pad where Cosmonaut Zero's mission began serves routine commercial satellite deployments. Tourists visit Baikonur Cosmodrome regularly, guided past the same facilities where humanity's first true spaceflight was planned and executed. None of the guides mention March 15th, 1960. None of the displays acknowledge the mission that preceded Gagarin by weeks. The silence is complete, professional and permanent. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the Kazakhstan steppes are quiet and the stars burn with unusual clarity, technicians at Baikonur report detecting brief radio signals on frequencies that were abandoned decades ago. These signals, lasting only seconds and occurring perhaps once or twice a year, carry no identifiable message or call sign. They are logged as equipment malfunctions or atmospheric anomalies, footnotes in maintenance reports that are filed and forgotten. The mystery of Cosmonaut Zero has become part of the larger mythology surrounding the early space program, a legend whispered among space historians and conspiracy theorists, but never acknowledged by official sources. Like all the best secrets, it exists in the spaces between documented facts, thriving on absence rather than presence, growing stronger with each denial and each gap in the historical record. Somewhere beyond the reach of human investigation, in the vast emptiness between stars, the answer to this mystery continues its eternal journey. Whether as scattered atoms, silent machinery, or something else entirely, Cosmonaut Zero remains humanity's most distant representative, carrying our dreams and fears into the infinite darkness that surrounds our small, fragile world. The mission that began in secrecy on a March morning in 1960 has no scheduled conclusion, no planned return, no earthly resolution. It continues still, a reminder that some explorations lead not to discovery but to mystery, and that the greatest adventures sometimes end not with triumph but with silence that echoes through the void forever. And in that silence, perhaps, lies the truest monument to human courage. not carved in stone or cast in bronze, but written across the cosmos in the trajectory of someone who dared to leave everything behind in service of a dream too magnificent to be contained by the boundaries of our birth planet.